Despite a great effort by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs are still king. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today, as I am every Tuesday, by Locked On NFL expert Lauren Cox. On today's show, we're going to talk about why the Dak Prescott injury makes the NFC East a two-team race, if it wasn't already, why the Saints need to take their medicine and totally reset after firing Dennis Allen. But we'll start with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, still undefeated and Super Bowl favorites. Before we dive in, I do want to thank you for making the Locked On NFL podcast your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Lauren, what an incredible Monday Night Football game between the Bucs and the Chiefs. I know that Patrick Mahomes has a ton of talent, but man, the grittiness and the toughness of Patrick Mahomes doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah, the way they're always able to find a way, even in these games where you feel like, oh no, they're going to finally lose one. With Patrick Mahomes under center, they're never out of it. And clearly, even in overtime, they're going to come down and win.
100%. My guy Chris Clark from Locked On Chiefs broke down the big game.
And the Kansas City Chiefs moved to 8-0 on the season with a huge overtime win against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Arrowhead. Patrick Mahomes, 3 touchdowns on 3 third downs, 2 of them to the new wide receiver, DeAndre Hopkins. Absolutely huge night for both Hopkins and Mahomes. This was a game that they absolutely needed to win. They continue to pound the rock late in the game. Kareem Hunt got going in the fourth quarter and in overtime, and he was able to get the win at the very end of the game from 3rd down and 1 at the 2-yard line, able to run it in and get a score to win the game against the Buccaneers. Chiefs, like I said, moved to 8-0 on the season. Mahomes did have an injury scare. Looks like he's going to be okay. Looked like it could be a knee injury, ended up being an ankle injury. He went back in the game and played after the fourth quarter. Much more to come shortly on Locked On Chiefs.
Again, my big takeaway here is all of the intangibles with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, we know that he has the mobility. We know that he has the bazooka arm, all of that, the size that you need. But to play through that injury when it looked pretty bad when it first happened, non-contact, he could barely walk afterwards, was getting carried to the sideline. Then all of a sudden, he's walking on his own. Then he's jogging on the sideline. Then he's back out on the field making plays. And not only is it the toughness that people don't give Patrick Mahomes enough credit for, but then the clutch factor here. I mean, Chris talked about it on third downs, and my guy James from Locked On Buccaneers, he's going to talk about it too. But, I mean, Patrick Mahomes was 11 for 11 on his first 11 third downs, ended up 11 for 13. All 4 of Kansas City's touchdowns in the game came on third down.
Yeah, and to me, it shows the reliability of having veteran weapons that you just know you can trust. I mean, not only he mentioned DeAndre Hopkins coming in and having 2 touchdown games, but like guys like that are not just talented players, but like experienced guys who always know where the sticks are and always can make the play in the biggest moments because they've done it hundreds and hundreds of times, and that no third down is ever going to be too big or they're not going to get in their head about it. And for guys like Hopkins and Travis Kelce and even Kareem Hunt to some extent, finding a little bit of the fountain of youth in this game reminds you that, hey, like these guys aren't too old. These guys aren't too washed up. And when push comes to shove, especially in the postseason, those guys are going to be ready.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, obviously having Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes helps those guys stay in position, but Travis Kelce goes for 100 yards. DeAndre Hopkins looks fantastic. Again, like you said, 2 touchdown catches, a trade that I had been pounding the table for weeks, and Kansas City absolutely needed every ounce of DeAndre Hopkins' brilliance in this game. You got to look at the other side, though, with Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like, you know, without his top 3 wide receivers, Baker Mayfield was pretty great in this game. Didn't have the customary interceptions that he's had throughout most of the season. The defense made some big plays and some big moments. Where I'm going to lay the blame of this game on the Buccaneers is head coach Todd Bowles. And I think that at the end of that game, they get that last touchdown in regulation. You need to go for 2 in that scenario. And my guy, James Yarko from Locked On Buccaneers, thinks that might have been a mistake as well.
You can't win if you play scared. I am James Yarko, the host of Locked On Bucs, talking about the Buccaneers' 30-24 loss to the Kansas City Chiefs in overtime. The Bucs defense played relatively well early in this game, but Patrick Mahomes was 11 for his first 11 pass attempts on third down, resulting in 3 touchdowns throughout the game. However, the Bucs offense was able to get the job done at the end of regulation. Some key receptions from Sterling Shepard, a key run by Rachaad White, and a Trey Palmer reception set up the Bucs with 1st and goal from the 1-yard line. 2 plays later, Baker Mayfield finds Ryan Miller in the back of the end zone. However, Todd Bowles opts to kick the extra point instead of riding the momentum and going for 2 and going for the win. It turns out to be costly.
I thought it was hilarious that former Tampa Bay Buccaneer quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick, and now NFL commentator, literally said, if the Buccaneers score here, Todd Bowles is not going to go for 2. I could not help but laugh at that when I saw him tweet that.
Yeah, that situation, it's one thing to feel like, okay, hey, we're gonna have faith in this defense and put it back on them, but the math to me, it's simply it's just like the coin toss, right? It's like, okay, you know that the coin toss is a 50-50 shot of either you get the ball or the Chiefs get the ball and are probably going to score. So then your 2-point conversion decision is, do I think my chances of converting the 2-point is better than my chances of winning a coin toss? And if Todd Bowles says, no, I don't like my red zone offense there, I don't like my odds of winning a 2-point play, then you take the coin toss 50-50 odds. But if you think your odds are better than 50, you can score there, you got to go for the 2-point conversion. And the math for him didn't add up. And when you give the ball to Patrick Mahomes in overtime, what else do you expect?
Which is absolutely insane. Like, I get that we look at it from just like a math perspective, but this is where, like, to me, the analytics probably said to go for it there. So it's not like I'm disagreeing with the analytics, but you have to take into account the environmental factors here when you make these decisions too. Like, you just drove the ball down hot knife through butter to get the tying score or set up the tying score. You're in Kansas City. You're playing against Patrick Mahomes and that offense. Like, everything about that situation as the underdog tells you you need to go for 2 there. And it's just crazy how multiple times this weekend we saw coaches fail to understand that. I think in the Clemson game in college football, me covering the Titans, Gerard Mayo has a chance after seeing what Drake May does to give him a chance to tie that game. Like, I just don't understand how these coaches don't understand that you cannot take the chance of giving the ball back to this offense when you're on the road. It boggles my mind, really.
Especially for a team like Tampa that, like, we knew their defense wasn't that great coming into this game. And as well as they played against Kansas City in the first half, they kind of fell back to earth, especially in that fourth quarter. You know, the Mahomes was dialed in at that point. You could see that everything was back Kansas City's way. They weren't struggling. They weren't, Travis Kelce wasn't fumbling the ball anymore. Like, it was fine. And it was at that point, you should kind of read the room and go, okay, wait a minute. Like, our defense isn't what they were in the first half. They're kind of turned back into a pumpkin here. We can't trust them to stop Patrick Mahomes for a full drive and rely on a coin toss to be the deciding factor.
Well, the best coach on Tampa Bay's staff right now is Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator, and I would have put it in his hands rather than Todd Bowles. But does Todd Bowles have that self-awareness? Apparently not. But with that being said, speaking of self-awareness, do the New Orleans Saints have enough self-awareness to totally reset their program like they should? I'm not so certain. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to buy tickets, period. They have the best features in the industry, and they just got a new feature that makes Game Time even better called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Not only do they have Game Time Picks, but you get a panoramic view from your seat so you know what you're going to be looking at when you sit down. And if you toggle on the feature, you're going to have all-in pricing. So the price that you see for your tickets is the price that you pay for your tickets with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the second half of the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you open up the FanDuel app. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Lauren, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talked about a fantastic Monday night football game, but there was some big NFL news that happened before the game on Monday, and the New Orleans Saints have fired head coach Dennis Allen in the midst of a 7-game losing streak, and the mastermind, Ross Jackson, broke down the news.
The New Orleans Saints absolutely needed to make this move. The New Orleans Saints franchise was built on streaks. Playoff streaks, win streaks at home. Remember, with a dome field advantage, all of that. Streaks like the defense not allowing 100-yard rushers. The New Orleans Saints suffered their 7th straight loss for the first time since 1999. They became the first team in the last 20 years to lose a game in which they outgained an opponent by 150-plus yards and won the turnover battle, only to lose that game. They opened up the opportunity for quarterback Bryce Young to see his first victory formation of his career. That will be the end of the story for Dennis Allen, as Dennis Allen becomes the first head coach the New Orleans Saints have moved on from or had to depart mid-season since Jim Mora in the 80s.
Now, the question becomes for me, Lauren, this was obviously the right move. I think everybody knows that. But will the Saints take their medicine? You know, this is something that I talked about on this show when Alvin Kamara got his extension. Why are you giving a 30-year-old running back an extension with $20 million of new money when you're a team that is not even going to make the playoffs? Running back is a luxury position that you shouldn't be having an expensive player at unless the rest of your roster is sound. And the Saints, they're $60 million over the cap again next year. They don't have as many viable options to trim that, issue down like they've had in previous years. Are they going to go ahead and just bottom out entirely, reset this roster, or do you think the Saints are going to try to make another pivot here where they try to continue to put a winning team out on the field?
It's got to be hard to sell that to your fan base when you've lost 7 games in a row, right? Like that's why you fire the head coach mid-season, because things have been so bad there. And I feel like
they're better than they are.
But I mean, you fired your head coach, so they can't think they're that much better than they are. Otherwise, they would keep it rolling with Dennis Allen. But they think, okay, maybe the talent is
right.
And like that's the thing. It's like they don't have to start from square one. They've got young players at a bunch of key positions to where like you can go into this year and try and get a top 5 pick and maybe get a quarterback. But you've got young receivers, a couple young offensive linemen, a couple young defensive backs they've drafted in recent years. Like there are some longer term foundational pieces here where you don't have to blow up absolutely everything, but you can, eat it for a year or two, clean up the cap a little bit, add some high quality draft picks the next couple of years without trading them all away like they used to in the past, and flip this a little bit quicker than like a multi-year tear down and really stink for a while. Just, get one more good draft, get a quarterback and the right coach, and you can start to turn things around sooner rather than later.
Well, I guess in my opinion, Lauren, NFL stands for not for long, and stinking for 1 or 2 years, that is a true rebuild, in my opinion, in the modern NFL. You can flip it like that. That would be my expectation. But I think if they try to do what you're saying and they try to keep some of the pieces that they have, You keep a Cam Jordan around, you keep a Marshawn Lattimore around. Some of these guys, it's going to be impossible for them to actually add to the team in a meaningful way because they're going to have to be cutting people just to get back under the salary cap and restructuring deals just to get back under and then push the money out further. And it's just a snake that's going to keep eating its tail unless they just take their medicine, cut a bunch of dudes, and just accept the fact that they're not going to be good for a couple of seasons. I think that is what they need to do.
Yeah, and I think along the way you can find out who really belongs as that long-term piece versus who are guys that are just going to be here for a year or two to sort of ride the wave and then move on and replace them with more of your foundational pieces there. And I think, if with potentially picking in the top 5 right now, they're projected to pick 3rd based on strength of schedule right now. There's a lot of ball game left this season, but that's like nailing that draft with a top pick at the top of every single round. I mean, that can be enough to really jumpstart that. If you get that quarterback and you maybe get that foundational pass rusher or whatever it's going to be over the course of the draft, like that can be, this first draft can be the thing that gets that going with the right next coach.
Oh, it'll be so interesting to talk about if the Saints do get a really high pick in the draft. Do they keep rolling with Derek Carr or do they take that quarterback? Will they have the self-awareness enough to know? Because I could see New Orleans telling themselves, oh, Derek Carr can get it done if we just add player X or we trade down. And we don't I just cannot wait to see what path they try to go in the offseason. But looking at another team that made some firings, maybe not the big news that Dennis Allen getting fired by the Saints was, but the Las Vegas Raiders fired a bunch of coaches on the offensive side of the ball. They fired offensive coordinator Luke Getsy, offensive lineman James Craig, quarterback coach Rick Scangrello, one of the best names in the NFL. And Lauren, really, all I want to say about this, I just want to take a moment to say, one, if you're Antonio Pierce, keep your bags packed, buddy, because if you're in season 1 and they're already making you destroy your offensive coaching staff, they don't trust your hires, they don't trust your direction anyway. And then 2, you went into the season with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell at quarterback. I just think it's absurd to blame now, I don't think that Getsy and Scangrello and all these, I don't think that they're fantastic coaches, but I mean, give me a break. What did you expect? If you go into the season with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, you cannot expect better results than what they have so far. I just think it's absurd to blame those coaches for this.
And don't forget, trade away Devonta Adams after not getting much during the season. Like, tear down the offense and also fire the coach because it's their fault. Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah, that's why it feels to me, especially when you're firing multiple coaches here, it feels like there's more to this, right? It's not just you fire the offensive coordinator because you just want to get a different play caller in there, but you still keep all the same position coaches. But once you go OC and QB coach and O-line coach, that tells me, I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but read between the lines. There's more here than just, hey, the offense is not good enough and we need to kind of scapegoat somebody. It's like, no, there seems to be something deeper here. And the fact that they're even talking about bringing in Norv Turner to help fill some roles, who's been out of the NFL since 2019, tells you that they're really desperate here.
Yeah, and that goes in line with Marvin Lewis as a advisor, and they had all these older advisors to Antonio Pierce. I do find it hilarious, something that you pointed out before we started, that Luke Getsy used to be the offensive coordinator in Chicago. Clint Kubiak was a guy in the cycle. Shane Waldron goes to Chicago. It's the offensive coordinator carousel is something that you astutely pointed out before we started.
And Cliff Kingsbury as well was one of those. Didn't he interview with the Raiders, I think?
Yes.
They end up going with Luke Getsy.
He wanted a 3-year contract, and they only gave him 2.
That's right. But there was a moment when the Saints were 2-0, and everyone thought, wow, they got the good OC with Clint Kubiak, and they figured some stuff out. And the Raiders got some things rolling for a little bit there, and it's like, wow, maybe Getsy wasn't the problem in Chicago. Maybe it was Justin Fields. And now, well, look where we are now. And Chicago's not any happier with Shane Waldron either. So really, the Commanders and Cliff Kingsbury are the only real winners there.
Yeah, time answers all questions, it appears. And maybe some of these guys weren't quite as good as they looked. But with that being said, speaking of not being quite as good as they look, the Dallas Cowboys stink, and now their season is over because Dak Prescott is injured. And if it wasn't already obvious, it's a 2-team race in the NFC East. Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is sponsored by BetterHelp. Take a moment to say thank you to someone in your life. For me, I'm going to thank Lauren Cox, my gracious co-host, for putting up with me on these long Monday nights. But look, this month, November, should be all about gratitude. And along with Lauren, who I just gave a shout out to, there's another person that I don't think enough and that you probably don't think enough either. And that is yourself. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense of everything in this crazy world, and that isn't easy. Here's a reminder to send some thanks to the people in your life, including yourself. I've worked with BetterHelp. It was a great experience. If you're thinking about starting therapy, you need to give BetterHelp a try. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, Lauren, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the Chiefs staying undefeated, the Saints firing Dennis Allen. Now we got to get into the other big news that came out on Monday in the NFL, and that is an injury to Dak Prescott. And my guy Landon McCool from Locked On Cowboys broke down the big news.
The Cowboys announced Dak Prescott is going to be out for multiple weeks with the hamstring injury he suffered in Atlanta. As it turns out, it is worse than they initially feared. Hi, I'm Landon McCool with the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and the Cowboys managed to add insult to injury in this case as the loss of the Atlanta Falcons, the sinking of their season continues, and now their star quarterback, Dak Prescott, is out for multiple weeks due to the hamstring injury he suffered in Atlanta on Sunday. Dak showed a lot of concern for this injury post-game. He said that it popped in a way or felt a way that he had never felt before. When he initially left the game, many people thought it was due to the hand situation. He had a swollen hand and actually had to get a stitcher in it. But it turns out that the hamstring injury was the more concerning situation, as it looks like it will be keeping him out for multiple weeks. For more on this, make sure you check us out on the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
A depressed Landon right there for sure. I got to tell you, I think this is terrible news for Cowboys fans, because now instead of just accepting that the team that Jerry Jones built is awful and he did a bad job, they'll look back and say like, well, Dak got injured in the middle of the season and it derailed the season, rather than accepting, the terrible job that Jerry Jones did building this team and the issues that they really have. Like, I think that's a big loss for Cowboys fans.
Yeah, it feels convenient in that way, right? That things are going poorly, and then, oh well, okay, this can be a nice little excuse there. Because, I mean, you look at the rest of their schedule, Dak or not, they got Eagles, Texans, Commanders. The next 3 games is going to be rough, and then they still have, they have the Eagles and Commanders twice, and again at the end of the schedule, plus Bengals and Buccaneers in there. Like, they got a couple of wins on the rest left on the schedule, but not a ton. With or without Dak, this might still be a 6-win team. So, why not lean into the mess a little bit at this point and give Trey Lance a shot? I mean, what are you going to go to Cooper Rush at this point? Like, we know what Cooper Rush is and isn't in his career.
Rush hour.
Not a good NFL quarterback. So maybe Trey Lance isn't either, but we could at least try and find out for sure.
Yeah, no, that's 100% what I think they should do at this point. And again, it's the point I've been making about Bryce Young and the point I've been making about Will Levis. Like, he's either going to lead you to some promise or he's going to lead you to a pick. Like, no matter what, Cooper Rush gives you absolutely nothing. There's no upside in evaluating Cooper Rush. You know who he is and what he is. So I'm with you there. Trey Lance absolutely needs to play. But you mentioned the 2 teams that really matter now in the NFC East. And again, maybe it was already the case that the Cowboys were out of this thing, but now we know for sure that it is the Commanders or it is the Eagles, and both teams sitting at 6-2. Who do you trust more, Lauren, the Commanders or the Eagles?
This one's tough because they both have history of collapsing here that I don't have a lot of faith in, but
right.
Gun to my head, I got to go Philadelphia Eagles here, only because they have the experience behind them, not only at the quarterback position, but just across the roster. Like, they've played playoff games and won playoff games here. Whereas, yes, the Commanders literally have a rookie quarterback, but even if Jaden Daniels wasn't a rookie, like, this is just a new staff and a lot of young players that haven't played postseason football ever in their careers and won postseason games. And Cliff Kingsbury has a history of his team starting out really hot like this and then collapsing in the second half of the year. I'm still kind of Still feel like that's going to catch up to them at some point here. But the Eagles were the biggest collapsers last year at all at the end of the year. So it's not like I can just say, oh, yeah, the Eagles are going to hold it together while the Commanders collapse, because the Eagles just did a collapse of their own. So I don't trust either one, but I lean Philadelphia based on experience.
You know what? I agree with you, Lauren. I do. I trust the Eagles more than the Commanders, and it's for basically similar reasons. The experience of the Philadelphia Eagles, but to make it like zoom in on that, the thing with the Eagles is they just have a ton of playmakers. Devontae Smith, AJ Brown. On the defensive side of the ball, they have a great rotation of pass rushers with some of those Georgia guys. We see Nakobe Dean finally make a play at the end of the game last week, get an interception. Like Darius Slay hasn't been his absolute best by any means whatsoever, but still a guy who will make some plays for you in some big moments. Jalen Hurts is starting to look a lot better now that he has his actual weapons out there with him. Saquon Barkley, obviously, with the backwards hurdle. Like, what are we doing? Just insane. I just trust the playmakers on the Eagles. Even when they play poorly, they just have guys who will make a play in a big moment. And that matters at some point, especially when you have two teams that are good. Like, who do you trust more to make the big play at the end of the game to win it for their team? And for me, it's going to be the Eagles as well. But that'll be a fun thing to monitor. That's going to be a great divisional battle as we go down the stretch of the season. But speaking of going down the stretch of the season, make sure that you stick with us here on the Locked On NFL podcast down the stretch of the season. It's going to be a good one here. We're into the second half of the year. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. Also, make sure that you check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins, the barber himself, in the barbershop for all of your additional NFL news. That's going to do it for us today, though, on a Tuesday edition of Locked On NFL. I am your host, the Madman Tyler Rowland, here as I am every Tuesday with Lauren Cox. And as we tell you every time, stay safe out there.